Thanks for coming today. We're here to introduce medical pioneers. Can you imagine prior to the mid-1800s when there was no sterilization? Uncleanliness was unheard of. Doctors and nurses, I'm sure, went from patient to patient without changing their smocks, scrubbing up too well, surely not sterilizing their instruments. So patients who came in for a simple procedure, they would later find out weeks or so that they had contracted a fatal disease due to uncleanliness in the operation. So thanks to Louis Pasteur, Joseph Lister, and Pierre and Marie Curie, all that changed. Today, we have more of a controlled environment. So today, introducing this will be Brandon, Gibson, Chris, Lori, and Jennifer. Sorry.
Sure. All right, cool. All right, so first, I'm going to talk to you guys about Louis Pasteur. He was a French chemist and microbiologist. He founded the principles of vaccinations, microbial fermentation, and pasteurization. A little bit on vaccinations, just preventative measures that you get to, stop diseases from happening like before they are a problem. The fermentation, it works kind of like glycolysis and in an anaerobic, which is no oxygen present. Instead of pyruvic acid being produced like in the human body, it's ethanol being produced like the alcohol we drink. So he also worked with the germ theory to prove that bacteria was responsible for the souring of like wine and beer and milk. The germ theory was that microorganisms invade cells and reproduce pretty much to cause disease. So his first vaccine was actually for chicken cholera, and it was kind of discovered on accident. The chickens were exposed to a weakened form of the culture, and he actually proved that it helped cure it. So he also developed vaccines for anthrax, cholera, tuberculosis, rabies, and smallpox. And of course, his name, he invented pasteurization, which is the heating of a liquid such as milk to a point between 140 and 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and then cooling it quickly, killing most of the bacteria.
Alright, hello everyone, my name is Brandon. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Joseph Lister. He was a famous British surgeon and scientist. He was regarded as the founder of antiseptic medicine. He was born April 5th, 1827. Now, during his time as a surgeon, he observed that 45 to 50% of amputation patients were dying in his wards due to sepsis. He believed that it was due to unsanitary working conditions. After learning of Louis Pasteur's germ theory, he used phenol as an antiseptic, reducing the mortality rate in his ward to 15% within 4 years. While a surgeon at a hospital in Edinburgh, Scotland, observed several patients dying from infections post-surgery. Believed it was due to unsanitary working conditions. He started a strict sterilization procedure where he would start washing his hands and wearing clean clothes. During that time, most surgeons would wear bloody scrubs and the like because they believed that it was a social status for them to wear something like that. That people saw that and said, "Oh, that's a mark of a good surgeon." However, they didn't realize at the time that that's where germs were coming from. That's how people were getting infected. They believed at the time that infections came from the wounds themselves. So, like I stated earlier, after reading Louis Pasteur's research, that's where he realized it from. And then he began washing his hands, equipment, bandages, and the like in phenol, which greatly reduced the amount of deaths in years to follow. Later on, he began experimenting with different techniques using sterilization. He used wiring to repair broken bones in the body, and realized that it can be left in the body as long as it's sterilized with phenol. And he also adapted usage of sterilized catgut sutures. That these would be safe. These would safely dissolve over time within the body because they were made out of organic material from animals.
Pierre and Marie Curie, both were renowned scientists in their own right. Working together, they won the Nobel Prize in Physics and discovered two elements, polonium and radium. Pierre Curie was born in 1859. The French physicist was a pioneer in crystallography, magnetism, and radioactivity. Some of his earlier research with his brother Jacques included the discovery of piezoelectric effects. That word is so hard. This would later be a major contributing factor to Marie Curie's research in radioactivity. Pierre Curie's research in magnetism and piezoelectric effects would later be instrumental in the invention of the magnetic resonance imaging, or the MRI, which we pretty much can't live without anymore. Marie Curie was born in 1867 in Warsaw, Poland, but later moved to Paris, France to continue her education because of the sexism at the time. They wouldn't let her continue studying. She met Pierre Curie while working on magnetism, and they were later married. She began researching radioactive materials, which later led to the discovery of two new elements, radium and polonium. Their research earned them a Nobel Prize in Physics. It was jointly awarded with Pierre Curie and Henri Becquerel. These French people. She was the first person to ever receive a Nobel Prize. She would later be awarded a second Nobel Prize in chemistry. Marie Curie is the only person to be awarded 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different disciplines, which that still stands today. So she's pretty amazing. Her medical contributions were overshadowed by the discovery of the new elements. She proved that certain illnesses could be treated with radium, especially cancer, which is still a common treatment today. During World War I, she left her research and drove an ambulance with an experimental X-ray machine into war zones, which were called Little Curies. She was the first to implement X-ray into medicine. Sadly, there were consequences to the Curie's research because at the time, very few people knew the adverse effects of the exposure to radiation. The Curies were known to carry little vials of radioactive material in their pockets, which is insane now that we think about it, but back then they didn't know. Their research papers have to be kept in lead boxes in Paris because of the contamination from the radiation. Pierre Curie would experiment on himself, making a paste of radium and leaving it on his arm for 10 hours to see what the effects were. Both the Curies would suffer from radiation burns on their hands from handling radioactive material. Sadly, Pierre Curie became very weak from the exposure, and in 1906 he tripped and fell in front of a horse and cart, killing him instantly. There's a lot of speculation that this was because he was suffering from radiation sickness. Marie Curie would later die of leukemia in 1934, caused from the years of exposure of the radioactive material.
Okay. So in conclusion, the discoveries of these medical pioneers are just amazing, and they're all things that we take for granted these days. Have you ever had surgery? I'm sure some of you had. Could you imagine what the outcome would have been had the tools and the OR not been sterilized prior to your procedure? Thanks to Joseph Lister, we don't have to worry about that. We go in to have surgery and we know that everything is going to be sterilized. We all know today that if we walk into an emergency room with some type of injury, leg or arm or whatnot, that there's going to be an X-ray machine there to go ahead and take a picture of it to assess the injury so it can be treated. Could you imagine having a tumor in your brain that could be treated, but you never know because there was no MRI to take a picture of it? Thanks to the Curies, we have that available to us today. Have you ever gone to the grocery store and picked up a gallon of milk and wondered if it had 1,000 bacteria swimming inside of it? Probably not, because thanks to Louis Pasteur, you know that milk in the grocery store is pasteurized. Our day-to-day lives in modern medicine would be very different today had these pioneers not made these very important discoveries. And the next slide is, these are all our references that we used for this information.